everybody. It's good to see your smiling faces again. I can't wait to see you in person. I am Jana, not Jenna. And I am introducing our two judges for tonight. By the way, it's an exciting night. Lots of really cool photos that are going to be showing up tonight. Our first judge was not able to make it due to a conflicting appointment. His name is Jim Christensen. He's a photographer, teacher, and speaker from the New York City area. He's the president of the Croton Council on the Arts, founder of the Photographers of North Westchester Club, and was the artist in residence of Acadia National Park in the spring of 2015. He's spoken and run workshops at He's spoken and run workshops at many of the photo clubs in the Northeast and has a deep technical background in digital imaging theory and software as a result of his career as a research scientist at IBM. You can see some of his work on Facebook, where he's the Jim Christensen in Westchester, New York, and on his website, jimchristensenphotography.com. This is Cynthia. Cynthia, will you raise your little, say hi? Cynthia is a native Washingtonian. Her love of photography started in a journalism class at Walt Whitman High School, and over the years has led her to scenic locations from Alaska to Maine in search of landscape images. Her specialty is garden landscape photography, a marriage of her vision for the grand landscape and intimate flower portraits. Cynthia has been a member of the North Bethesda that Camera Club since 1992, where she has exhibited, participated in numerous presentations, and served on multiple committees. She is a certified judge by the Maryland Photography Alliance and a frequent judge at camera clubs in the greater Washington area. Outside of photography, she has a BA in music and an MBA from the University of Maryland and holds the Chartered Financial Analyst designation. Cynthia has worked for several financial firms in the Washington, D.C. during her career as an investment manager. You sound like you have had a lucrative life.
Busy life.
Well, thank you for joining us. Thanks for being here, and thanks for working with Jim. And it's good to meet you. And I'm going to mute now.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen now. Hold on one second. If you hear a vacuum in the background, that's somebody vacuuming my kitchen. Let's see here. There we go. Can you see that, Cynthia?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Welcome to our projected image of the year competition for the general and monochrome categories. Tonight we're going to start with general, and we have 48 entries. We have one winner and 4 honorable mentions. So without much more fanfare, let's start. First up is Model Against Wall, Ray Henriksen.
Maybe before we get into all these, for those who weren't on earlier, let me give you a little background on how we came to our decisions. So Jim Christensen and I were given these images a few days ago. We independently looked at them and chose our first and honorable mentions. And then we came together and found that we were unanimous on first place for both the general and the monochrome. And our honorable mentions, there was a lot of overlap in. And then what we did was we went through each of the images in both categories. And I've got his notes, I've got my notes. And so you'll get the benefit of both of us, even though you'll only hear me talking. And in general, we both had a lot of the same approaches to the images. I like to categorize it as the 4 C's. The first is craftsmanship. That's the technical aspects of the image. The next is composition. Then creativity, which could be looking at something very familiar in an unfamiliar or a different way. And the last one would be communication. Did it create a mood? Did it capture a decisive moment? What was going on that made that image special? So That being said, as we go through each of them, I will try and follow our notes and speak to those 4 points as well.
Okay.
So in this image, we really appreciated the lighting on the model's face. You can see both eyes clearly. There's nothing blown out in the image, technically very well done. The pose is not just her standing stock still. There's a little movement here with her hair and her arms. There's, a question. She's looking right at you, at the photographer. The only drawback that we saw was the background, that we thought it was a little incongruous. She's very soft, her hair, her dress, and then the wall was highly textured, hard, gritty. So we think this image would be even better with a different background.
Okay. Next up is Angel's Light, Ron Herden.
Everyone loves the slot canyons, and you just can't get enough of the texture and the curves and the light in these canyons. And this captures that very well. Your eye is drawn into the back because of the light that's just around the corner and on the ground there in the sand. The texture in the rock in the foreground is excellent and carries all the way through. So that conveys that mood of, although these are rounded shapes, it's still rock. The only drawbacks we saw here were that the upper right-hand corner is a little dark, could be lightened up a little bit, and the light on the sand is just a little harsh. If we could tone that down some, we think it would be very good.
Next up is Great Blue Heron, Costa Rica, Ray Hendrickson.
And we appreciated the photographer's use here of the lights and the darks in this image, that the subject is not pinpointed in the middle, but still has room in front of it to walk into or to look into, etc. The back of the bird is not cut off. There's a little room there as well. So from a composition standpoint, it's well framed. We like the rim lighting on the front of the neck of the bird, and that you can see its eye very clearly. We also like the darkening of the background that was done, which helps the bird to stand out. To make this image better is difficult because the background and even the foreground is very cluttered. But remembering that our eye goes to the brightest part of the image, might want to look to tone down some of the sticks that are in the most part of the foreground, and also the one pointing diagonally up towards the bird.
Okay. Next up is Fall Theater, Neil Shapiro.
The composition of this is excellent, and the feeling of solitude and quietness. You'll notice the water is very calm. There's not an angry sky. It's a very calm day. The placement of the chairs in the center there gives it a good balance. The weighting of the amount of the dock versus the rest of the image, about a third, is very pleasing. There were 2 things here that we think could help the image. The trees on the far hills look a little bit oversaturated. In digital, it's kind of like, if you remember, for those of you who've been around a long time, in Belvia, certain colors in digital just always look blown out, whether they are or not. And reds and oranges are one of them. So we think if you just tone back the saturation in the oranges there, it will still give that fall feeling, but it won't look quite as saturated. And also in the upper part of the sky, seems a little oversaturated, whether that was done by a vignette or a gradient or something. It's a little overdone.
Okay. Next up is Mono Lake, Ron Herden.
Great shot of the tufas here with the sun in the right place, coming up just over the edge of the one in the middle, which really accentuates the texture of these tufas, how rugged they are. Notice that we can see detail in the stone as well as in the sand. The light on the sand in the lower right-hand corner is very attractive. The sky is well held. The one thing we did notice with the tufa on the far left, that the top is so much darker that the image might actually benefit from cropping down, not quite the top third, maybe the top quarter of the image. We don't have to see the top of that tufa, and I think it would draw the eye more to the wonderful light in the middle of the image.
Okay, next up is Multi-Lilies, Linda Tomasulo.
Very nice use of this technique, especially in the background with the complementary colors there and the softness of it. Gives it kind of an otherworldly thought with the flowers floating, if you will, on the background. Jim thought that he would have liked to have seen a little more grounding of the front flower, whether that meant making the lower petals there a little darker or standing out a little bit more to give it kind of a base. I felt like the use of the technique on the flower in the front is interesting, but perhaps a little too much to make it a little too edgy, given the softness of the rest of the image. And that could be toned down, the edginess turned back just a hair.
Next up is Aging Beauty, Claudia Jakubowski.
Very interesting composition of the upside down dying flowers. It gives certainly a mood, especially with the dark background, which is very nicely held here. And the light, the painted on light of these flowers is also very evocative. We felt like the composition was a little unbalanced with the distance between the flowers at the top and the flowers in the bottom, maybe a little too wide, and maybe the whole image could be cropped in from the right-hand side to give it just a little more symmetry, because it did feel top and left heavy.
Next up is Hungry Zebra, Nancy Futner.
This is a great capture of the moment, right? The decisive moment. You want to make sure he watches his fingers there. Those are big teeth. It's just a fun image. The zebra technically is tack sharp around the eye and the mouth, etc. And it's doing something other than just braying or whatever you call a zebra noise. With the carrot, and the carrot being brightly tinted, draws your eye to it. It's just a lot of fun.
Next up is Markin Cafe, Sharon Silversmith.
This image does a great job of capturing a mood within the restaurant. The light on the tables, on the flowers and the glassware there is very nicely done. The overall mood of being darker or unused at the moment. Two drawbacks. One, the person on the far right could be cropped out, the arm of this person, and I don't think you would ever miss that part of the image. And Jim was hoping that we could see something a little more interesting, either out the window, maybe to make that a little more saturated, or to have something of interest to look out the window at, or alternatively to have a person seated at one of these tables.
Next up is The Egg, Rich Schreibstein.
I don't know where this is. It's a really interesting structure. The photograph is very well done. You can see the texture in this thing very well. You've got the star points on the lights below it, and the reflections in the water and on the pavement there. It's just a really interesting image that holds your attention and makes you say, what in the world is this?
Okay. Next up is Subway Ride, Marguerite Hill.
We were talking about this is kind of a comment on our time at this point, even though it's obviously pre-pandemic because no masks, but if we're not on our phone, we're taking a nap. It seems these days everybody's on their phone. You know, it's an interesting capture of the moment. Tells a story about a subway ride here. And, you know, there was the only detraction from the image is the bright reflection at the top of the sign there. Hard to decide what to do with that, probably just to tone it down. If you cropped it, then you would lose probably most of the head of the person by the railing, but you could try that and see if it looked too stark.
Next up is The Land That Time Forgot, Neil Shapiro.
A very interesting treatment of this image where you have the flowing part of the water, you have the rainbow, and then you have the textured rocks. So it's an interesting treatment. We think there are lots of different images in this image. You have just the falls in the background with the rainbow. You've got the textured water there in the lower left and the rocks, etc. I think we felt like the combination of all three of those kind of left you wondering somewhat. It's an interesting landscape. Technically, it looks like perhaps if the sky had been darkened a lot. Go back and look at your mask there. It looks like the top of the mountains there have a black streak across them, which is telltale that we didn't do our mask exactly to the edge. So more work to be done.
Next up is Snowy Afternoon Nap, Dan Steen.
We like the concept of this image of finding the bird there hunkered down in the snowstorm. Wish that the bird was a little sharper or more clear. I don't know if you can try some dehaze on that. Wish we could see the eye a little clearer, etc. The snow in the upper right being bright and without detail is distracting. It pulls our eye away from the bird. So maybe a crop off the right-hand side would keep us focused on the bird.
Next up is Playground, Connie Frisbee Hood.
This image certainly sets the scene and gives you a sense of place with the chickens and the trash and the children. Certainly does a good job of that. We wish we could see a little bit more of the children because we think that's really more of the purpose of the image or what you were trying to say as opposed to the chickens, even though they help set the stage. If the kids are running around or if you can pose them at all, you know, to have them more the center of attention, perhaps running or looking at the photographer or doing something interactive there. But it certainly does set the scene.
Next is Where Did the Puck Go? Dan Steen.
It's an excellent action shot. You get the idea of imminent collapse of the guy in blue. I think two things on this. We wish that we could see the puck, even though that's what the title says, that you can't find it. It would be good to see that and or one of their faces grimacing or doing something. But it was a good capture of the moment.
Next up is Blue Moon Oil and Water Abstract, Joe Catronio.
This is an interesting abstract. You know, you've probably seen lots of these mirror image, complete multiplications of an image. But the thing that was interesting about this is that while the smaller circles are indeed circular and looking a bit concave with the shadowing going on, the larger circle, the yellow-orange circle, is not completely round. It's a little more oval. So that was an interesting byproduct of using this technique.
Next up is Where Is Everyone? Claudia Jakubowski.
This image has a great feel. I love the reflections of the water on the pavement, the line of the pavement itself leading you back in, down the street, the colorful storefronts, very nicely done. Jim felt like the wires above were a distraction. And I think since there's not much happening in the sky, you might want to try cropping it down to the top of the orange building on the right or somewhere along there, and maybe removing what's left of the wires at that point. But that would really keep you grounded on this line of the pavement and the reflections there, which is the best part of the image.
Next up is Ever Watchful, Jerry Baum.
A lovely portrait of this eagle, good detail in the feathers. We can see the eye, you know, clear background. Do you want to have more in the background? That's always a question. These days, of course, you can change out your backgrounds fairly easily in Photoshop and other applications. But you don't want to have something there that's going to distract from the eagle. So a nice portrait.
Next up is Ilium Cafe, Rich Schreibstein.
A street scene of lots of people is always hard to get everybody telling the story. And I think here we didn't know what the story was. We have all these people that are looking in different directions, and we don't know why or what we're trying to be looking at. And for the lady in the front, around her eyes is very dark. It would be nice to have that lightened up a little bit more so we could at least see her eyes a little bit better.
Next up is Rainy Day at St. Andrews, Scotland, Phil Olivo.
Very nice leading line up the path and around where those flowered bushes are and the fence line, etc. The person is nicely placed in the image. The sky is obviously ominous and darkened. This image could probably be improved by crop off of the bottom, especially because the grassy area in the lower right is bright and not particularly interesting, and it pulls our eye away from the person in the pathway. So cropping it up maybe 25 or 30% off of the bottom would probably help us stay focused.
Next up is Peony Artistic, Joan Heffler.
A very interesting treatment of this flower. A little mixed message here. So we have the softness, the roundness of the petals of the pink flower. But then with the treatment, we also have introduced some jagged lines in the flower and in the background as well. So it's a little uneven, if you will. You don't know what the photographer is trying to convey here. And I think playing with the treatment a little bit more, I don't know if this was done in Topaz or some other program, but playing with the sliders on some of those different layers that it provides would take care of some of that.
Okay, next up is Fog Over the Mohawk, Ronald Spear.
Another very calm scene with the fog rising in the background and the gentle sunrise or sunset there. A little atmospheric going on in the clouds as the steam or fog rises. Very interestingly done. The bottom third of the image really isn't adding anything because the pretty light is not reflected there, and it in some ways, because it's a little bright in the lower right, draws our eye away from the fog, which is the most interesting part of the photo. Might also want to consider cropping in some of the right, the large bush or tree there on the right really doesn't add anything to the image.
Next up is Resting Frog, Nancy Futner.
This was great. Love the really the detail in the eye. Think of if this image had been taken with the eye closed, it wouldn't be nearly as interesting, and you're probably wondering what it is. But the eye really cements the fact that it's this nice frog of an interesting color, hidden among these extremely colorful leaves. I think remember your eye goes to the brightest part, but also the more saturated parts. So the orange parts of the leaves in the background do pull you a little bit away from the subject, which is the frog. So maybe desaturating the background just a little bit will keep you here in the foreground where the frog is.
Next up is Smiling Dragonfly, Joe Cotroneo.
This is, love these images of bugs, things that we don't see with the naked eye, pay attention to. Just the look at the eyes, the reflection of the light in the eyes, the detail in the legs and the hairs around the face, etc. Very nicely done. The one detractor in this image is the bright stick that it's standing on. And if you can tone that down a lot, it will really keep the viewer's eye right on the bug.
Next up is Apples, Carol Bell.
This is a very well executed still life. Notice the background is not obtrusive at all. It disappears, yet we still have the nice reflection below the apples. The fact that one of them was cut and you can see the interior of it adds some interest. The light is very even across it. And I think maybe that was the one thing that stood out to us, is that it's very even. There's no energy. That's probably not the right verb, adjective, whatever. But it's very well technically done. It needs a little more oomph. That's a technical term.
Next up is Curiosity, Connie Frisbee Hood.
Very lovely girl looking right at you, beautiful eyes. The skin tones and everything carried very well as the white ribbon in her hair. So as a portrait of her, it's very nicely done. The little boy in the background, also, he's not as sharp as she is, but you get the impression of him playing with his ball or balloon there. The main detractor of this image is the person's arm in the right-hand side, which is brighter than her and doesn't add anything to the photo.
Next up is Bye Bye Blackbird, Ronald Spear.
It's always fun to get the birds landing or taking off at the water being stopped like this, a very fast shutter speed. So kudos to the photographer for their choice of the shutter speed here. Any object black is always difficult to shoot and not have it block up. It's difficult, especially if it's wet like this bird. Unfortunately, we can't see its eye very well, and there's nothing else in the image really to give us any scale or interest.
Next up is Allium and Insect, Marguerite Hill.
Lovely choice of f-stop here, because you see we've got the bug and the important parts of the foreground flower sharp and the background recedes away. We talked about this one a great deal and think that perhaps if you have enough resolution in this image, to crop it down significantly, to lose almost all of the background and maybe the right third of the front flower, so that you focus, so that the image is the flower and the bug, and we don't need the rest of that.
Next up is Ed Woodco Ride, Biker, Thomas Whitmore.
A good portrait of this fellow. We both agreed it's too bad you couldn't go up and tap him on the shoulder and ask him, hey, could you look at me? Or to move him a little bit, because the silver corrugated window or whatever is back behind him, because it's lighter and because it's not uniform with the bricks of the wall, draws your eye away from him. And this is supposed to be a portrait of him. We like the pose of him on his bike, but the background is a problem here.
Next up, Joy of Sunflowers, Barb Lawton.
This is a very interesting image. We like the texture and the treatment of it. It's different. It has good colors in it between the orange and the blue, the complementary colors, etc. I think, I know for Jim, he felt it was unbalanced and that was off-putting to him. I like the photographer's use here of this technique. And I think obviously a still life is to play with the composition some and see if you can get something that might be a little more balanced.
Next up is Red Canoe, Alan Wiggins.
We also spend a lot of time talking about this one because we both like the red canoe, the yellow oars, the person in the middle, the symmetry of the oars and the canoe, etc. But the thing that really detracts from this image is the white boat. Again, because your eye goes to the brightest thing, you keep getting pulled away from this really cool image otherwise. So the white boat, you can make that go away, the image would probably be stronger.
Next up is Sparkler, Thomas Whitmore.
So this is, we had a fun talk about this one. This is an interesting demonstration of this saw or whatever it is that they are using. The photographer did a great job as far as the exposure is concerned here, and in the shutter speed in stopping all those sparks, but holding it so it didn't get blown out. And we agreed that you should show this to the maker of this instrument, and maybe they would buy this image from you for marketing.
Next up is Get Your Own Flower, Linda Tomasulo.
This is a fun composite, and we love the bird, the sharpness of the bird, the color and the feathers there, the fact that it's looking at you. We didn't understand what the photographer was trying to communicate here. This image would be enhanced by an artist statement, for example, if you had it in an exhibit, to really tell us what we're trying to be conveyed. But you know, the bird is excellent, the pink flower, the light, the glow in the petals there is very nicely done. The positioning of the leaves is a little different. It just needs a little more explanation, I think.
Next up is Rainy Day Monday, Jenna Kindwood.
This is a very appealing image. There's a lot going on, but it's a very comfortable scene. There's great detail in the flowers and the rocks, etc. We like the line and the angle of the stream and the placement of the bridge in the image. Wish that the bridge was just a little brighter. Again, you want the eye to go there because, again, your eye goes to the front part of the water here, but you want us to go deep into the woods. And so I think if the bridge was just a little brighter, that would help pull us into the image.
Next up is Up and Down in the Woods, Carol Bell.
This is a nice swipe. You've probably seen many of them. It's very in vogue right now to do the swipes, but this one works particularly well. You've got excellent colors in the upper 2/3 of the image, and the lower third being brighter makes you think. So, because usually you would have a bright kind of bluish part of the image at the top for the sky. So then it makes you think, well, maybe this is a reflection in water. So this is a good abstract because it makes you think.
Next up is Portland Head, Doug Mitchell.
We both like this image very much because of the treatment of the lighthouse and the building and the rocks. Very textured, especially in the lighthouse. The water, interesting line on that. Thing that we really didn't like about the image, not that we didn't like it, we love the image, is where is the direction of the light? So on the lighthouse, the light is coming from over your left-hand shoulder, and that's uniform on the rocks in the lower right. But then how do we get the sun coming up behind those clouds out over the water. So that is a problem. It's a great dramatic sky, but it doesn't fit with the direction of the light on the rest of the image.
Next up is Festive, Elena Kesey.
This is an excellent image as well. We like the diagonal that's created here in the background, the softness of the background, but the sharpness of the droplets and the reflection in the droplets, also very interesting. It was very well seen and well executed.
Next up is Moughton Shipyard, Jana Kaywood.
Very high key image. It probably could do with a little more darkness in the building in the middle to give more definition to the old wood that is there. It could probably stand a little cropping too up from the bottom because the snow is featureless, etc. We don't need to see it. We just need to know that it's there. So I think you could probably lose the bottom quarter of the image and then darken the building just a little or put more contrast on the building so that we can see some of the texture there.
Next up is Fall Colors on Oswald River, Alan Wiggins, Oswald River.
A lovely scene with the autumn colors in the trees, very sharp, very nicely done. You know, the sky is held well and the mountains in the distance. Unfortunately, you kind of lose the person sitting on the rocks because the water and the rocks in the foreground are so bright. So a couple things you could do is to tone down the rocks here in the foreground some, or when you were shooting it to you know, work with your polarizer to take some of the glare off the rocks, or since now it's post-capture, just cropping it up from the bottom. If you take it up until just before the water starts cascading over the rocks, then what you do is you really draw the person's attention to the stream and the trees and the person, as opposed to getting caught right here in the foreground in the rocks and the water.
Next up, Looking for Relatives, Bill Lanahan.
We like the concept behind this, very, very moving image. We wish there was a little more contrast on the wall so that you could see the names just a little more clearly, to have them stand out a little bit more. The big detractor here is the planter or container here in the foreground. Hard to obviously probably move that when you're there, but maybe moving you around to get a different angle. We like the shadows on the wall, etc. Just a few things that could be tweaked.
Next up is Autumn Milkweed, Larry Hill.
Technically, this is very well done. We like the lighting on the milkweed and the luminescence of the, I don't know the botanical term, but the white part on the left, the seeds. Very nicely done. Background, obviously not distracting at all. Unfortunately, the thing that we felt detracted a little bit was the angle of the milkweed itself. So perhaps, you know, using free transform or something and try straightening it up a little bit, because what it does to your mind's eye is the right-hand part of the milkweed where the pods are still closed feels heavy because they're solid, as opposed to the seeds, which you can see through and are very light appearing. Or maybe try flipping it to the right, so turning it to the right so that the heavy part would look like it's pulling it down, which would be much more congruous to your mind's eye.
Next up is Peppers in Repose, Phil Olivo.
A nice still life. We like the background that you can see some texture in that, as well as texture in the peppers, and that there's not a, there's just enough glare on it to give it some texture and life as well. Compositionally, it's kind of static.
Next up is Lock 7, Sean Sullivan.
Interesting, we debated whether perhaps this was a drone shot or from a very high bridge. Great time of day with the light is lovely under the clouds and reflecting on the water. The light on the building on the right, because it's also a little more saturated on the building, pulls your eye over there. Perhaps if you desaturated that some, it wouldn't be as distracting.
Okay, honorable mentions. First up is Amish Joyride, Barb Lawton.
So let me say that all the other images that we just saw very well could have been honorable mentions. I mean, the hard part about judging a year in competition is that everything you see is already a winner. So it makes it difficult to pick the best of the best. If you don't agree with us, that's okay, because when it comes down to the finals, final selections, in many ways, it is the judges' personal preferences, as well as being excellent images. And this one we like very much. What makes this image is the little boy looking at the photographer. The cart where you can actually see the horse gives the context, just enough grass along the road, and the road not being too bright. It's very well done.
Next honorable mention, Rolling Hills, Bill Lanahan.
Gotta love the Palouse, and this was an excellent rendering of that time of day. The angle of the light brings out the contours and the land, the colors, etc. We might like to see the structure on the left toned down just a little bit, but otherwise a very pleasing and very well done image.
Next honorable mention, Bye Bye Autumn, Lena Kesey.
This is goes into that category I mentioned of creativity. This is looking at an ordinary thing, like a squirrel, in an unordinary way from the back. But notice the detail in the leaves, in the squirrel's fur on his back, even on the berries that are on the side of the pumpkin there. It's just a fun image.
And the last honorable mention is Fading Fast, Sean Sullivan.
This is a wonderful still life. The background is neutral, but in complementary colors. The flowers are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and there's enough detail there that you can see that they are definitely past their prime. Having the tin on the table with some of the flowers as well, and then the arch of the leaf coming down there is very well done.
And our winner, our 2020 projected image of the year for general category is Blue Paladin, Doug Mitchell.
As I mentioned, this was our unanimous choice for first place. Technically, everything just done extraordinarily well. The lighting on the face and on her dress, especially around her eyes, and then the treatment, the blue haze, if you will, on her hands and on the flowers, with the background being basically all black. Very, very pleasing, very well done.
Congratulations to all our winners. And now we're going to move on to the monochrome category, which we have 47 images, 1 winner, 4 honorable mentions. First up is Nature's Pyramids, Neil Shapiro.
So we had a harder time coming up with the honorable mentions on this one, although we were unanimous on our first place, because so many of these are just fine black and white images, and this is one of them. You look at Traditionally, when you look at a black and white image, you want to see white whites and black blacks, crispness in the detail, and this hits all of those categories. You've got the snow with some detail in it. You've got the rocks where there's still a little detail in the black areas, and an interesting line going from the foreground to the peak in the back. The only thing with this image, you might want to crop a little of the right off, because the right-hand corner with the fog or whatever, there's nothing happening there, and it would keep our eye focused on this procession of the rocks up to the peak.
Next up is Belle Santa Fe, Ray Hendrickson.
Very nice symmetrical image, well seen by the photographer. You've got the silhouette of the bell, but you still have texture in the wooden part there at the top of the window or whatever, and texture in the wall. Just nicely done.
Next up is the Central Railroad of New Jersey Terminal, Doug Mitchell.
The treatment here is interesting to try and make this obviously look like an aged photograph. We would have liked to have seen a little less of the treatment so that you could see the people a little more clearly. The light in the upper right-hand corner also pulls your eye up there and away from the people, which we think is really the interesting part.
Next up is the Grand Teton, Ronald Herdman.
This is an excellent portrait of the Tetons. And again, everything crisp with white whites and black blacks. And I'm sure you were thankful to have an interesting sky going on, because many times when you're out there, the sky is just stark blue. And then the shadows of the clouds on the mountain is very nice, nicely done.
Next up is Window Light, Barb Lawton.
This is an interesting image. Kudos to the photographer for seeing this or staging this. The light behind the gown and shining through the gown, very nicely done. And you got texture in the wall behind it, and just enough for the hangers to see that it was hanging.
Next up is Black Velvet, Doug Mitchell.
This is a wonderful portrait. The pose, the background, the flooring, everything. We wish it was a little brighter, the whole thing, just the exposure to be just a little brighter, because the lighting on her face is very nicely done. And Jim suggested, you might want to think about, because the lower part of the image is nearly as interesting as the upper, is you also might want to think about cropping it off about where if you can see the wainscoting in the back, where the horizontal line is there, to cut it there. You would still get enough of the folds of her dress to understand its fullness, but it would keep your eye on her face.
Next up is Summer Storm, Joe Cotroneo.
This is an interesting image with a lot of contrast in it, between the dark water and the clouds, and then the light on the grasses and everything here. We thought it was maybe too much contrast, that your eye gets pulled down here to the lower right, and you can't really pull yourself back into the rest of the image. I would have liked to have seen what it looked like in color. Don't usually say that with the black and white, but it looks like there was a lot of detail here that might be very interesting in color.
Next up is Standing Tall, Linda Tomasulo.
This is excellent rendering, very well seen, and the positioning of the photographer, notice right smack in the middle, to get the real impact of the angles of this building. It's really a study in triangles of the building and of the whole image, and nice in the sky as well, with the reflection in the building of the sky and of buildings around it.
Next up is Icelandic Village Beneath the Rays, Jenna Kaywood.
Nice capture of the god beams coming from the sky and over the top of the mountains, it really accentuates the jaggedness of the mountain range there, and then accentuates also the small village down in the valley there. This one probably could stand just a little more contrast to make the blacks a little blacker in the image.
Next up is Moonglow, Neil Shapiro.
An interesting treatment of this, obviously a long shutter speed if taken at night, with the interesting light on the falls in the distance there and the spray of that. So very moody, and maybe again here could be selectively a little higher exposure. You would probably want to mask out any additional exposure on the falls in the distance, but the rest of it could stand with maybe just a half a point of additional exposure.
Next is Reflecting the Past, Nancy Futner.
Interesting texture in this part of the wall of this building, obviously old, etc., with good contrast on the architectural image parts of it. The one thing that left us wondering was the reflections in the window, which again seems kind of incongruous, and maybe that was the photographer's intent, but it's a little, maybe a little too much.
Next up is Zinnia, Claudia Jakubowski.
Lovely portrait of this image, of this flower. Again, a little soft, both in its contrast as well as in the focus on the flower. If you want to, I see multiple images here, maybe just a very tight crop, depending on your resolution, around where the base of the stem comes in, and just those petals in the front that are sharp, with the other petals being out of focus as the background.
Next up is Skywalks, Lena Kesey.
This is a very popular thing to shoot these days. As Jim said, we think it may not be here much longer. But this rendering of it is very well done because you see the people on the different levels and each of them are distinct. So you don't have a lot of blocking up of them. You can tell more or less what each one of these people is doing, whether they're going up the stairs or looking over the railing, etc. So well captured by the photographer.
Next up is Tinsmith, Dan Steen.
This is a good industrial portrait of this gentleman at work, because you can see his face clearly. You can see what he's working on, and then the background gives you the rest of the story: his shop, his tools, etc. Again, here could probably use a bit more contrast, but well composed.
Next up is 2x2, Ron Spear.
So we debated this one a bit. Obviously, the light reflecting on the vertical parts of the bridge is what attracted the photographer. And the rest of the background, she wasn't very interested in. Again, we see different images or different possibilities here, and hopefully you bracketed your composition while you were there. In the film days, we were always told to bracket our exposure, but it's also equally important to bracket your composition, because when you walk into a scene and you see something, you say, oh, that's really cool, I want to take a picture of that, is to take what you first saw and then to step back and say, well, what really drew me to the scene? And perhaps it was just the light on the stanchions on the left and the shadows that it threw. So maybe you just zoom in and just take that, or the one on the right, etc. So I think there are different compositions that could be made here.
Next up is Cold and Alone, Barb Lawton.
Another high key image. It definitely makes you feel cold with the streaks in the sky and also with the snow. I think you could probably crop a little bit off of the bottom. Right now, your horizon is more or less in the middle, and I think it would add a little more interest to have a little less in the bottom of the image.
Next up is boat, Connie Frisbee Hood.
An well-seen image because it gives you a sense of place. We've got the interesting old boat kind of beat up with the oar in it, and its partner back to the right. You've got the palm fronds, which tells you this is not in Alaska. So it gives you a sense of place and the sand in the foreground, etc. This definitely could use some additional contrast. Just watch the rocks in the distance there that they don't get blown out.
Next up is Pussy Willow, Joan Heffler.
A good idea here to capture these branches. I think maybe too much branches. If you cropped it down to just a portion of the upper or the lower branches as you see fit, it would be a much more evocative image.
Next up is I Was Here First, Marguerite Hill.
A good scene out the window or whatever of the birds, especially the one on the left looking at you, the one on the right, it would be better to see a little bit more of the eye, again, hard in a black bird to get the kind of detail that you might need. And hopefully if this bird feeder is in your backyard, that you'll have a chance to make lots more images of your friends.
Next up is Rose at Night, Joan Heffler.
Excellent detail in the petals, especially in the middle of the flower. Very interesting design there. The background, even though it's darker, still is a bit distracting. We don't need it. You can crop it out, tone it down, make it go away. Because of the light areas in the background pulls us away from the very interesting shapes of the petals in the middle.
Next up is Peony in black and white, Linda Tomasulo.
An interesting treatment of this flower as well, especially like the way it renders the petals around the sides of the flower. Probably a little too much of the effect on the stamens, or what is the yellow part in the middle of the flower, because now it makes them look jagged. You know, we talked about that in the color image before. So you can, I assume this was done in topaz, you can reduce some of the opacity of that image, that portion of the image. You can put a mask on it and mask out some of it. It's a little too much of the effect in the middle there.
Next up is Chimney, Thomas Whitmore.
Well seen by the photographer. And, really appreciate the contrast between the diagonal swirly lines around the chimney versus the horizontal bands around it. An interesting view looking up at it with an interesting sky as well. Really shows the details in the chimney.
Next up is Bridge over Mohawk River, Paula Keefe.
This is a great angle to capture this bridge. It really gives you the feel of the sweep of the arch in it, and the sense of place with the water underneath it, and the detail in the rivets there you can see on the left-hand side. The right-hand side of the image doesn't contribute a lot to it, but I think something that would make it stand out more is if you darken the sky a good deal from where it is.
Next up is Misty Sunrise, Connie Frisbee Hood.
Very moody image. The toning, I don't know that you would need the toning. You could also try this as a high key image and see what that might look like. But it gives you, you know, I mentioned a minute ago about having the horizon not in the middle. That's not always, that's no rule of thumb, not to put the horizon in the middle, because here your horizon, if you could really see it, or the edge of the lake, is in the middle. And when you do that, just do it with malice of forethought, if you will, because when it's balanced like that, it gives it helps to give it a serene feel, which this has as well.
Tip is a walk in the woods too, Carol Bell.
It's an interesting image. We couldn't really make out what in the world was going on here, but you know, the interesting shapes, and technically, yes, captured those shapes with the background not being distracting.
Tip is Wish I Was a Harley, Ronald Spear.
Again, lots of different images in this image, probably. The one detractor, and it could be that the building is crooked, but the building is leaning to the left-hand side. I think straightening that up would help the viewer focus on the Harley, and would also take care of some of the lower part of the image.
Tip is Exchange Student, Thomas Whitmore.
So an interesting portrait. You don't always take a portrait of someone looking from the bottom up. Why they chose this pose in front of this building, if they're trying to tell a story about this location or this particular individual. Again, this is something that would work in, if you think, in a newspaper with a caption, or in an exhibit if you were telling a story as a series of images.
Up is Church Steeple, Paula Keefe.
Excuse me. So we get the picture that it's snowing. That's cool. Good job by the photographer. Notice the shutter speed is just slow enough to capture some movement in the flakes, but not just streaks or smudge. And that the church steeple is centered and fairly symmetrical. However, if you'll notice the peak of the roof, if you're trying to make it symmetrical, the peak of the roof is not exactly in the middle of that window above it. So a step to the right, you would have positioned yourself so that the peak of the roof was right in the middle of that window, and then you would have had the symmetry.
Next up is The Last Dance, Phil Olivo.
Another good image of flowers that are past their prime. Very good detail in the what remains of the petals, etc. Unfortunately for this, the background is really distracting because it's bright. So, you know, there you can, with masks and other things, you could darken that down significantly and force us to look just at these flowers.
Next up is Egg Path, Rich Schreibstein.
So I know you all get a lot of snow up there. Thankfully, we haven't been having much these days. It left us wondering about clearing a path into this tunnel or under this bridge or whatever through this door, and then the shadow on the right-hand side, which is pronounced, of we don't know what. So there are a lot of questions in this image. Perhaps that's what the photographer was looking to do. But it left us wondering what's going on.
Next up is Before Sunrise, Bill Lanahan.
Again, another serene image, partly because the water is calm. The clouds are pretty uniform across the top. Again, this is one I think could really benefit from just a little more contrast. Let's see more of the detail in the foreground and in the rocks.
Next up is Covent Reading Nook in black and white, Dan Steen.
We very much appreciated this image as being one of solitude, of comfort in where they are and what they're doing. Her reading here on the top of the stairs has her nook as the top, as the title implied. We felt, however, that the vignetting was probably a little too heavy. I don't know if you were trying to block out something on the walls, but try it without the vignette. The walls won't be that distracting because the kid at the top of the stairs is really where your eyes go. And the walls, if they're just plain walls, won't detract from that.
Next up is Windowless, Sean Sullivan.
Also an interesting, we debated this, whether it was a building or a platform, etc. Very good abstract of this structure, and the light going from the left to the right at the top also gave it kind of an eerie feel.
Next up is Podium Patterns, Elena Kesey.
Very graphic image, well done. You've got, white whites, black blacks, with lots of detail in the pavement and in the columns there. It's well done.
A Wilderness Retreat, Jenna Kaywood. Jenna.
Another good snow scene, again, with just enough blur in the snow to convey that it is snowing, but you can still see the detail in the trees in the background. But the snowbank in the front detracts from the rest of the image because it blocks off the trunk of the tree where it touches into the snow, and we tried to figure out if there would be a good crop there and couldn't come up with anything.
Next up is Thistles, Carol Bell.
A good thought here of looking at the seed pods in silhouette. I hope you shot multiple images of this. The light being right in the middle accentuates that pod that's right in the middle as well. I don't know if you try and crop in on just the center portion of the image, perhaps that would be a good shot.
Next up is Windswept, Kim Koza.
Another high key image. Now notice where the horizon, you think where the supposed horizon is in this one in the lower third of the image, gives it, especially with the way the tree is leaning, a very windswept thought, as the title implies. Not a lot of detail in the grasses to the right, but I think that's part of the mood of the image.
Next up is Way Too Easy Rider, Rich Schreibstein.
This is a fun moment of obviously in the pandemic, with the lady with her mask on the left and the gentleman on his scooter on the right, and her looking at him. If she had been looking at the boxes, it wouldn't have been nearly as compelling an image, but of her looking at him going by. It makes you wonder, what in the world is she doing in the trash there, and where is he going?
Next up is Feeder Canal, Alan Wiggins.
Very nice lines through this, as you can see the water leading you back into the image. Probably could use a crop on the left-hand side to take out maybe half of the path that we see there on the far left, which will keep your eye on that curve of the canal or river. And also probably could use a little brightening there as it recedes into the distance, so that it'll pull your eye back in there, because otherwise your eye gets caught on the bright spot where the person is, and you don't really see the person, and the bright spot on the left. But you want us to go around that curve and want to know what's in the distance there.
Next up is 100-Yard Scrum, Bill Lanahan.
This is a very interesting motion shot. You don't have anything totally sharp. So this is another good choice by the photographer of shutter speed, but in this case of using a slower one to accentuate the fact that there's a lot of movement going on here. Notice if the crop had been a little lower and you didn't see the eyes of the gentleman to the right, then this shot wouldn't have worked. But the fact that you can still see his eyes means that it works.
Next up is Fado Singers, Phil Levo.
So we don't know why this gentleman in the front's eyes are closed. If he was looking at his hands as he played, that might be one thing. And hopefully you took multiple images of this scene and caught one where his eyes were open. We get it that the gentleman behind is singing, and the people on the side are reacting to that. The crop is well done. We don't have a lot of distraction on the right-hand side, but we just wish his eyes were open.
Next up is Moon Over Manhattan, Sean Sullivan.
This is a very nicely done architectural scene. You can see a lot of detail in this building in the front, middle, and the moon, whether that was put in or not, is interesting. Adds a little interest to the sky on the right-hand side of the image. The bricks on the left-hand side and the two windows on the left that are bright pull us away from the rest of the interest in this image. So you might go back and try cropping it just to the right-hand side of the brick building there and see what you think about the resulting image.
Yeah, there are honorable mentions. First up, Daylily, Joe Catronio.
A very evocative image. Again, good choice of f-stop on this. So the stamen or whatever it's called, right there in the middle, you can count every pollen grain on it. But the feeling of the radiance of the rest of the flower is very, very nice.
Next honorable mention is 45 Jewels, Nancy Futner.
This is a fabulous still life in the arrangement of the watches, where you see the backs of the cases of the ones underneath, but you see the inside, the works of the ones on top. Notice that each of the ones on top, even though they seem to be at different angles, you can read the words. The words are right side up, even though the tops of the watches are askew. And notice the detail in in everything, front to back, top to bottom, side to side in this, and the variety in the designs of the watches. And it's very well lit, it's very well done.
Okay, next honorable mention, Peony, Kim Koza.
Very striking image. Notice the background, completely blank, which doesn't detract from the shape of the petals. This is all about shapes, this image, and contrast, the white of the inner parts of the flowers. And the thing that really makes this image, and you don't think about it at first, is the white, what you call it, sticking up right in the middle of the image. So put your hand over that. If that wasn't there, this image doesn't work. That really is what made this excellent image.
And our last honorable mention is Surrounded, Claudia Jakubowski.
A good example of a black and white image. Again, black blacks, white whites. Notice the positioning of the bench in the image with the reflection of the trees and the ripples in the water. Just a lot of texture movement going on in the image.
And our monochrome winner is Light Out of Darkness, Bertrand Schreibstein.
Now, this is the first place for many reasons. Number one, it's a very well executed black and white image. We've got black blacks, white whites. We've got detail. Look at his hair. You can see every hair. You can see his eye on the right, but just enough of the left to give you the hint that it's there. The positioning of his arm on his school papers, it's a picture of the pandemic. Notice the background, nothing. It's dark. And so it really conveys a mood as well surrounding the pandemic and no school and wearing a mask. It tells a great story.
Congratulations, Bertrand, and everybody else. Great images. And thank you, Cynthia, for great judging.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to see these wonderful images. You all did a wonderful job. As I said at the beginning, every one of them's a winner. It made our job very hard.
Thank you, Cynthia. That was a wonderful commentary.
You're
I
just
just
jealous
wanna-
your brother won, that's all.
Well, I just wanted to point out that I taught him everything he knows, so. Yeah, great job, bro. I see that, bro. Were you trying to give me a salute there? Yeah, okay. I understand. Good job, folks, everybody. Doug's not with us, right, today? I didn't see Doug.
Doug is not here today.
No, okay, yeah, wonderful stuff. The commentary was spot on, Cynthia. Some of the best we've had all year, quite honestly. Really appreciate that. And obviously all the winners, wonderful, wonderful effort. Good stuff, guys.
Anybody
Yeah.
any questions or comments?
If you all want to unmute there.
I'd just like to thank everyone that participated this season. And, I know that sometimes it's hard to hear the critiques and sometimes you agree and sometimes you don't, but it's definitely a learning experience. And even if you don't submit images, just watching and listening to a competition is probably one of the better things you can do to improve your photography. And we appreciate it, Cynthia. Thank you very much.